Good morning, Dan. And in for Amy this morning is Chicago Tribune editorial board member Kristen McQuarrie. And Kristen, in the wake of the terrorist attack this week at the Ataturk airport in Istanbul, which mirrored in many ways the attack on the airport in Brussels a couple of months previous, you've got this renewed conversation about airport security, what TSA should do. Report out of Dallas that they're just looking at the idea of moving security checkpoints to the curb, or inspecting cars as they first enter the airport, like you do if you go to a Bears game at Soldier Field and have the mirrors under the car and open your trunk and that sort of thing. Denny Kelly, who's an aviation expert, dismissed those ideas, thinking that they're going to create security and suggesting they're just going to create more impatient travelers and longer waiting times.
And even then, it's not going to work, because these people, if somebody is willing to give up their life, you're not going to stop them by checking under their car with a mirror.
And so this debate continues. Obviously, we know TSA's performance with respect to security at airports isn't tremendous, shall we say, but because in both Brussels and Istanbul, you had suicide bombers bring bombs into the airport, but not through the security checkpoint. If you extended the perimeter, could you remove or decrease the likelihood of such attacks in the future? For more on this and many other issues, we're joined by our friend, KT McFarland, of course, Fox News national security analyst. KT, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
It's a pleasure.
So what's your sense of the idea of focusing on airports as not really soft targets, but they continue to be targets nonetheless, and extending the security perimeter?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's treating the symptom, not the root cause. Mm-hmm. Because I think if it makes it tough to go to airports, they'll go to train stations. If it's tough to go to train stations, they'll go to sporting events. They'll go to malls. The issue is who's doing it, and why are we not finding them? I mean, I look at the FBI and say, wait a minute, they missed San Bernardino. They missed the Boston bombers. They missed Orlando. And in the case of Orlando and the Boston bombers, they had people who actually came forward to say, look these guys over. There's a problem here. And the FBI had them in their sights and then let them go. So I've got to say, what's our intelligence and law enforcement doing? Why are they not, for example, why did the FBI not pass on to law enforcement? We have suspicions about these people. So I conclude two things. One, are there not enough resources for the FBI? In which case, let's give them a lot more resources. Or number two, is it a different problem? Is it that from the top, every time we have a terrorist incident, the president has three standard things he says. One, we deplore violence. Number two, we got to make sure that we don't veer off into Islamophobia and accuse our neighbors. And number three, let's take away the guns. So I'm saying, well, maybe when the president says that every single time, it sends a signal not only to the American people, but to the government employees. Well, you don't want to be accused of being Islamophobic, so therefore don't follow the leads, or therefore American people don't report if you see something, say something. So I think it's not just moving the security perimeter of airports. Yeah, that's nice. Probably more expensive than it's worth. I would go right to the heart of it.
Do you think in going to the heart of it that Turkish officials, we've been writing and reading about their need to wake up to the reality of ISIS sympathizers within their midst? I think there's a recent report out in the past couple of days that there are up to maybe 25,000 estimated ISIS sympathizers in Turkey. So is this going to be a turning point with that government to crack down on what is becoming a homegrown problem for them?
Well, for the Turkey had a slightly different thing. What they did was, and I don't have any proof for this, just a lot of suppositions from the intelligence people I've talked to in the intelligence community. The Turkey made kind of a deal. And they said, look, ISIS, just don't have any problems within Turkey, and you can therefore transit our borders without impingement. You can sneak across from Syria and Iraq into Turkey, and then from Turkey make your way into Europe. So I think they made a deal with the devil, and now the devil's coming after them. But what it does point out is all of Europe is vulnerable. And once somebody gets in, once a terrorist sympathizer comes in, either disguised along with the migrant groups, or somebody who's in a European country, travels to Turkey, sneaks across the border, gets trained, come back, through Turkey and then goes back to Brussels or Paris or Germany or whatever, they have a huge problem. And I don't think they're going to get in front of that problem. I think that the problem is already too big, and it requires too many resources. And the Europeans have not cooperated with each other in sharing no-fly lists, something as simple as a no-fly list. They're only recently starting to share those. So I want to make sure that that doesn't happen to us. And the only way to do that is to get serious about our borders, get serious about our intelligence, and get serious about admitting we have a problem.
We're talking to KT McFarland, Fox News national security analyst. KT, maybe before we talk about Erdogan's middling rhetoric on terrorism and so forth, some of the inconsistencies there, we should take a step back because we have some slow learners in this country, and I thought maybe you could help a competing cable news network. MSNBC tweeted after the attack, the terrorist attack in Istanbul, question, is there a pattern to these recent terrorist attacks? And since MSNBC is baffled by what has happened in Orlando and San Bernardino and Somalia and Afghanistan and Istanbul, is there anything that emerges as far as you can see in terms of a pattern with respect to these terrorist attacks?
Yeah, I think that what the terrorist attacks have shown us is that ISIS has been ever adapting, so that or radical Islam is ever adapting. So they couldn't attack who they wanted to in the late 1990s, which was Saudi Arabia, so they attacked the United States on September 11th. But then we went after them in Afghanistan. They ran away to Pakistan. We went after them in Pakistan. They ran away to Syria and Iraq. We went after them there, and then they've run away to Libya, and they've, in fact, spread. As we have gone after them in military and real terms and, in territory and land and people, what they've done is they've jumped over borders, not only with migrants, but they've jumped over borders with social media. And so somehow we're in this never land of a bunch of, people and young kids in the desert of Yemen who are somehow outsmarting the social media of the United States, the country that created the Internet, computers, microprocessing, Snapchat, Twitter, Facebook, and somehow a handful of ISIS supporters are getting the better of us on that. So I don't understand that. But as far as the inability of the liberal media to recognize there's a problem, don't take my word for it. Take the head of the CIA. While President Obama was out last week saying, oh, look, we've got this under control, no worries, want to make sure that we don't have Islamophobia, and by the way, take away the guns, the head of the CIA was going to Congress and he said, look, we're scared. We think that there are other attacks coming. And then after the Istanbul attack, the CIA director, John Brennan, he said the same thing again. He said, we can expect attacks like this in America this summer. The intelligence community is spooked. They know there's stuff coming down, and they don't want to be left holding the bag or the scapegoats for when it does.
Well, you have to forgive the Secretary of Defense. He's been busy on a transgender policy, so
don't get me going.
He's sidetracked. I wanted to get your thoughts on Iraqi forces taking back Fallujah and whether or not we can see this as any sort of a turning point, or if the back and forth, just as easily in the next few months we'll hear that ISIS has retaken it.
Well, I said a minute ago how they've been adapting. They'll move if they don't. If we take Fallujah, they're going to Libya. They're already a mobile international organization, and if we shut down one franchise, they'll move to another. And as far as Fallujah itself, yeah, it's important, but this is the fourth time we fought over Fallujah in the last couple of years. I don't think it's the last time we're going to fight over Fallujah.
Before we let you go, I want to get your reaction to the report that was issued yesterday about the Iranian detention of our naval personnel, 10 of our sailors, back in January. The Navy concludes that some of the Navy sailors gave up their passwords to laptops, cell phones, sensitive data about their ships to their Iranian captors. That's a no-no, but also that Iran, our new partner in peace, you'll recall, violated international law by impeding the boat's innocent passage transit, and they violated sovereign immunity by searching and seizing the boats, and by photographing and videotaping the crew. And I guess all of those descriptions of what occurred and the violations that occurred on both sides, we'll just go by the boards and we'll move on.
Yeah, I think, again, it's scapegoating. Now, were those sailors wrong? You bet they were wrong. It's name, rank, serial number, nothing else. And were their commanders wrong for not training them? Name, rank, serial number? Yes. But the real fault I put to Secretary of State John Kerry. So when the sailors were taken, what does he do? He comes out and thanks the Iranian people for releasing our prisoners and apologizes for having them there in the first place. Now, he may think there's nothing important about that and what's an apology in the great sweep of history, but what that did was it gave Iran the ammunition, the PR victory, the ideological domination, so that the picture of the American sailors on their hands and knees, hands behind their heads, Iranian guns pointed at their heads, that went viral all around the Middle East. And what that said was America's on its knees to Islam. America's on its knees to the caliphate. America's on its knees to Iran's superiority and ambitions in the region. So I blame the Secretary of State. We should not have responded by thanking them. We should have responded by cutting off the negotiations over the arms control and doubling and tripling down on the sanctions.
Well, maybe the unfreezing $150 billion in their assets will teach them a lesson.
I think that this is a story which will continue, and that's one of the reasons we need a new president and a new foreign policy team. She
is KT McFarland, Fox News national security analyst. KT, thanks for joining us. Have a great Independence Day weekend.
Same to you, too.
And she joined us on the turnkey.pro answer line.